Welcome back to Black Trauma is Not Black Culture.
Yeah, this is episode 6.
And today we're diving deep into something really heavy but super important, especially for our listeners.
Yeah.
Political gaslighting and Black trauma. Protecting mental health in an anti-Black system.
We've got some really powerful sources for this deep dive.
Okay.
Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow.
Right.
Carol Anderson's White Rage. And Angela Davis's Are Prisons Obsolete?
Oh, great sources.
Some really important texts.
Yeah, and I know that we're going to be using those to explore how political systems, past and present, contribute to trauma in the Black community.
Absolutely.
And how a tactic called political gaslighting plays a role in all of this. So let's start right there.
Yeah.
Political gaslighting.
Yeah.
We hear this term a lot, but what does it actually mean, like, in practice?
Well, in practice, political gaslighting is a manipulation tactic designed to make people doubt their own experiences and perceptions of reality.
So you're saying it's like more than just disagreeing with somebody.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like making them feel like their reality is not real.
Exactly.
Okay.
It often involves like denying or minimizing their concerns, shifting blame, and distorting the truth.
So it's not about like having a debate.
No.
It's about actually changing the way that somebody thinks about the world.
Right. And when it's directed at marginalized groups like the Black community, it can be incredibly damaging.
I see what you mean. So it's like taking something that's already a struggle
Yeah.
and then adding this extra layer of manipulation on top of it. Okay.
So it's not just about disagreeing, it's about undermining someone's entire sense of self.
So is it like when you're expressing genuine pain about injustice and you're told you're overreacting or being too sensitive?
Precisely.
Yeah.
And when this happens repeatedly, it can really deeply impact your mental health.
Yeah, because you start to question your own sanity.
Yeah, you start questioning your sanity, your judgment, leading to feelings of isolation and self-doubt.
Right. And then on top of the injustice, you're also dealing with this feeling of like, am I crazy?
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, so to see how this is played out historically,
Yeah.
we're going to start in the post-Civil War era.
Okay.
And, you know, I think a lot of people think, oh, slavery ended, problem solved.
Right.
But our sources paint a different picture.
Definitely. Yeah, the end of slavery in 1865 didn't magically erase the deep-seated racism that was ingrained in American society.
Right.
And Southern states pretty quickly implemented laws called Black Codes.
Black codes, yeah. Okay.
Then these were specifically designed to restrict the freedoms of newly freed Black people.
So even though slavery had ended in name,
Yeah,
they were finding ways to sort of recreate it.
exactly. They were intended to maintain white control and exploit Black labor.
So it's like slavery under a different name.
Basically.
And these Black codes forced Black people into labor contracts.
Right, with extremely limited rights and harsh punishments,
Oh, wow.
even allowing for whippings for minor infractions.
Really whippings. Wow.
It's a far cry from freedom.
That's not freedom at all.
No, not at all.
And it seems like the intention was really to maintain this system of control,
Absolutely, regardless of what it was called.
regardless of what it was called.
A Louisiana official at the time even said, "We want to get things back as near to slavery as possible."
Wow.
Huh.
So they were very open about their intentions.
Oh yeah, this sentiment was widespread throughout the South.
That is chilling.
Yeah.
It's just so blatant. So this blatant disregard for Black freedom,
Yeah.
it seems like it's a powerful early example
Right.
of how political gaslighting can manifest. You're telling someone they're free while simultaneously trapping them in a system designed to control them.
Exactly.
Wow.
And that manipulation, unfortunately, continues in various forms throughout history.
So where do we see it next?
Well, a stark example is how the criminal justice system has been used as a tool of racial control.
Okay, the criminal justice system. So we're talking about like the police.
The police, the courts, the prisons,
Okay, the whole
the
thing.
whole system.
And how does that connect to this idea of gaslighting?
We'll take the war on drugs, for example.
More on drugs.
Yeah, which exploded in the 1980s.
Right.
You know about this, right?
Yeah, I mean, I remember learning about how the war on drugs
Yeah,
disproportionately targeted Black communities.
absolutely.
Even though drug use was similar across racial groups.
It felt like a system designed to criminalize Blackness.
Yeah, it really did.
And you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Media coverage and political rhetoric at the time deliberately racialized the drug problem.
Okay.
And this fueled policies like mandatory minimum sentences, which, as Michelle Alexander points out,
In the new Jim Crow.
yes,
Yeah.
led to the mass incarceration of Black people.
And that's creating a new era of racial caste in America.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've got this system that is set up to target black people. And then to make matters worse, challenging racial bias in the courts became incredibly difficult.
Incredibly difficult. During that time, there were several Supreme Court rulings that made it nearly impossible to prove racial discrimination in the criminal justice system.
So even though it was happening, you couldn't do anything about it.
Right. A prime example is the 1987 McCluskey v. Kemp case.
Okay.
This ruling essentially stated that even if statistical evidence proved racial bias in sentencing, it couldn't be challenged without proving the prosecutor's conscious, deliberate intent to discriminate.
So even if you could show that there was a pattern of black people getting harsher sentences than white people for the same crime, you couldn't do anything about it unless you could somehow read the prosecutor's mind.
Exactly. It placed a nearly impossible burden of proof on those challenging racial bias.
And that in itself is a form of gaslighting.
Absolutely. The legal system itself is designed to ignore and therefore perpetuate the very real systemic racism embedded in its application.
So you're saying that the system is rigged?
Rigged, yeah. It's like a rigged game where even when you point out the rigged rules, you're told you're wrong.
Wow, that's a powerful way to put it.
Yeah.
It makes you realize how these seemingly neutral systems can be incredibly insidious.
Yeah, the system's very structure is designed to make you feel powerless.
Powerless?
It's like constantly hitting a brick wall and being told that the wall doesn't exist and you're the problem for running into it.
That is so frustrating.
Yeah.
Just that image.
It's a very real experience for many people.
It feels like we've uncovered a deeply unsettling pattern here. We start with a history of overt oppression.
Right.
Then we have policies like the war on drugs that specifically target black communities.
Yeah.
And then the legal system itself is structured to make it almost impossible to fight back against racial bias.
Exactly.
It's no wonder that there are such devastating mental health impacts within the black community.
You're connecting the dots in a way that really highlights the insidious nature of this dynamic.
It's heavy stuff, but it's important to understand.
It is.
So how does all of this connect to this idea of political gaslighting?
Right.
On a broader scale.
That's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll examine how these historical patterns continue to manifest today. We'll delve into the rise of Trumpism and explore its connection to political gaslighting.
This is intense, but so important to understand. Ever feel like you're drowning in to-do lists? Especially if you're a solopreneur, nomadpreneur, juggling a million things at once for your startup. Clients, projects, invoices. It's a lot.
It really is. For small businesses and startups, time equals money, right? Every minute you're not bogged down in admin is a minute you could be growing your business.
And that's where B1 Thrive says their Thrive Cloud comes in. Could Thrive Cloud be like your secret weapon?
Yeah.
Getting all that admin stuff organized, giving you more time to actually focus on your business.
It's definitely worth checking out. It's user-friendly, it's affordable, it works wherever you are. That's a pretty compelling package for solopreneurs, nomadpreneurs, startups, anyone really. And don't forget, they've got that free trial.
Exactly. Go to b1thrive.com, give it a shot, let us know what you think.
Yeah.
You might just find that Thrive Cloud is that missing piece you've been looking for, even if your office is a beach in Bali.
Welcome back to our deep dive into political gaslighting and Black trauma.
Picking up where we left off, exploring how these historical patterns of oppression and manipulation continue to show up today.
Yeah, and we're going to shift our focus now to the rise of Trumpism.
Okay.
And how it connects to this concept of political gaslighting.
So it feels like the term political gaslighting became a lot more common during Trump's presidency?
Right.
Was that just a coincidence?
I don't think so.
Or was there something about his rhetoric and policies that really amplified this dynamic?
Definitely not a coincidence. Trump's rhetoric and actions frequently employed classic gaslighting techniques.
Like what?
Like denial, misdirection, a blatant disregard for facts.
Okay, so can you give us some specific examples?
His response to the white supremacist rally in Charlottesville is a prime example. Remember when he said there were very fine people on both sides.
Yeah, that was incredibly controversial.
For good reason, he minimized the very real threat of white supremacy and equated neo-Nazis with those protesting against hate.
Right.
That kind of rhetoric is deeply gaslighting, particularly for Black people who are directly targeted by white supremacist violence.
It's like he was trying to create a world where racism doesn't exist.
Right, or at the very least isn't a significant problem.
Yeah.
That denial of reality is a classic hallmark of gaslighting.
Okay.
It's meant to make people question their own perceptions and lived experiences.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, am I overreacting?
Exactly.
Did that really happen the way I saw it?
And when the person gaslighting you holds a position of power, like the presidency, it becomes even more difficult to push back against that manipulation.
And it felt like he was a master at deflecting criticism.
Right.
Every time he was accused of racism, he would just call the accuser racist.
You're right. That's another classic gaslighting tactic, projection.
Okay, projection.
You deflect attention and sow confusion by accusing others of the very thing you're guilty of.
It's a tactic that seemed incredibly effective.
It was effective.
Especially given that he had such a large and devoted following.
His supporters often echoed his gaslighting rhetoric.
So it wasn't just him.
No, it was like a whole ecosystem of gaslighting.
Okay.
They dismissed concerns about racism as fake news or liberal hysteria.
And that created a really unsettling dynamic where people felt like they couldn't even talk about racism without being attacked or ridiculed.
That silence, that inability to speak your truth is incredibly damaging.
Okay.
It reinforces the power dynamics of gaslighting and further isolates those being targeted.
So how did all of this impact the mental health of Black people during Trump's presidency?
Imagine living in a country where the president is openly espousing racist views, where white supremacy is on the rise, and where you're constantly being told that your concerns about racism are invalid.
It sounds like a recipe for anxiety, depression, and trauma.
Absolutely. Studies have shown a significant increase in mental health issues among Black people during Trump's presidency.
It's not surprising given the constant barrage of racist rhetoric and policies. It felt like the country itself was gaslighting an entire community.
You've hit on a crucial point. The intersection of political gaslighting and Black trauma. The political climate under Trump created a very real swath of danger and vulnerability for Black people.
Especially when you consider the existing trauma from police brutality.
Yeah.
And the ongoing mass incarceration of Black people.
Right.
These issues were already major sources of pain and fear within the Black community.
And it felt like Trump's rhetoric and policies just poured gasoline on the fire.
You're absolutely right to connect those issues. They're all part of the same systemic problem.
They are.
When Trump encouraged police officers to be more rough with suspects, it sent a chilling message that Black lives don't matter.
It was terrifying, like giving permission for violence against Black people.
And it wasn't just about physical violence.
Right.
The constant stream of negative stereotypes and racist rhetoric takes a huge toll on mental health as well.
Absolutely.
It's like a form of psychological warfare. It's exhausting and demoralizing to constantly be bombarded with messages telling you that you're less than, that you're dangerous, and that you're not worthy of respect.
And that kind of psychological abuse can be just as damaging as physical abuse.
Wow.
It can lead to feelings of worthlessness, shame, and self-hatred.
So given all of this, what can we do to protect ourselves from political gaslighting?
Yeah.
Especially in a world where these harmful ideologies and tactics persist.
Remember, you're not alone. Connecting with others who share your experiences is crucial. Find communities where you feel safe, seen, and supported. It's also essential to speak your truth, even when it feels uncomfortable or risky.
So it's about finding strength in numbers and refusing to be silenced.
Exactly. Your voice matters. Your experiences matter. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise.
That's a powerful reminder. It can feel overwhelming to challenge these systems and structures.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that we have the power to resist these harmful narratives.
We do.
One of our sources, Angela Davis, talks about the need to completely reimagine our approach to justice. In her book, Are Prisons Obsolete?
Right.
She makes a powerful argument for prison abolition.
Davis's work is so important. She highlights how the current system is fundamentally racist and rooted in the legacy of slavery.
Okay.
It's a system that perpetuates trauma and fails to address the root causes of harm.
Her ideas might seem radical to some, but I think it's crucial to have these conversations.
I agree.
And explore alternatives to systems that clearly aren't working.
Especially when those systems are actively contributing to the mental health crises within the Black community.
So we've talked about the historical roots of political gaslighting, how it manifests in the criminal justice system, and how it was amplified during the Trump era.
Yeah.
But what about other forms of political gaslighting?
Right.
Are there ways it shows up that are less overt, more subtle, and perhaps even harder to recognize?
You're right. Political gaslighting can take many forms.
Okay.
And it's not always as blatant as Trump's rhetoric. Sometimes it operates in more insidious ways.
Okay.
Through seemingly benign policies or practices.
So can you give us some examples of what that might look like?
Think about the way Black communities are often portrayed in the media.
Okay.
It's rare to see positive representations of Black families, Black success stories, or Black joy.
It's true. It often feels like the only time Black people are in the news is when there's a crime, a protest, or some other negative event.
Exactly. That constant barrage of negative imagery reinforces the stereotype that Black people are inherently problematic, that they're the source of social ills, and that even if unintentional is a form of gaslighting.
So it's like you're being told that your community is only worthy of attention when it's failing.
Yeah.
When there's something wrong.
And that can have a devastating impact on self-esteem and community pride.
Yeah.
It can also lead to internalized racism, where Black people start to believe the negative stereotypes about themselves.
Right, so it's this vicious cycle. You're told you're a criminal, so you start to act like a criminal.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is those narratives were imposed from the outside, and they're designed to control and manipulate.
You're right. These narratives are incredibly powerful because they shape our perceptions of ourselves and our place in the world. And this type of gaslighting doesn't just happen in the media.
Okay.
It can happen in schools, workplaces, even within our own families.
Well, it's like it's all around us.
It is.
It's not always about someone explicitly saying you're wrong or you're crazy.
Right.
It's about creating a culture where those messages are embedded in the very fabric of our institutions and interactions.
Exactly. Think about the way Black children are often disciplined more harshly than white children for the same behaviors in schools. Mm-hmm. Or the way Black employees are often passed over for promotions even when they're more qualified than their white counterparts.
Right.
These are examples of how systemic racism manifests in subtle, everyday ways.
Okay.
And when you're constantly facing these microaggressions, it can be very difficult to distinguish between what's real and what's not.
You start to doubt your own perceptions.
Yeah, you wonder, am I being too sensitive or am I just imagining things?
Right.
That's the insidious nature of gaslighting. It makes you question your own sanity.
So how do we protect ourselves from these more subtle forms of political gaslighting?
Yeah.
It feels like it's all around us, often disguised as something else.
It is. It's essential to develop a critical consciousness and awareness of the ways in which racism operates in our society.
Okay.
We need to be able to identify those microaggressions and call them out when we see them.
So it's about learning to see the patterns,
Yeah.
to name them, and to refuse to accept them as normal or okay.
It's also crucial to surround ourselves with people who validate our experiences and who can help us process the trauma of racism.
Okay, so having a support system.
Yeah, having a strong support system is essential for navigating these challenges.
It sounds like self-care is also crucial.
Absolutely.
If we're constantly battling these external forces, we need to make sure we're taking care of our mental and emotional well-being.
Engaging in activities that bring us joy and peace is essential for resilience, and seeking professional help when needed is a sign of strength, not weakness.
These are all such important strategies for navigating a world that can feel so hostile and disorienting at times.
You can.
But it can feel overwhelming.
Yeah.
How do we move from simply surviving to actually thriving?
Right.
In a system that often feels designed to undermine our well-being.
That's where we'll pick up in the final part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
We'll explore the connection between political gaslighting and voting rights, and discuss strategies for reclaiming our power and advocating for change. You're on a beach in Bali, right? Working remotely.
Nice.
And you suddenly need client info, project deadlines, got to send an invoice. Boom. ThriveCloud's supposed to put all that in one place.
For anyone out there feeling swamped, trying to run their business, think about it. Could ThriveCloud be like your secret weapon?
Yeah.
Getting all that admin stuff organized, giving you more time to actually focus on your business.
It's definitely worth checking out. It's user-friendly, it's affordable, it works wherever you are. That's a pretty compelling package for solopreneurs, nomadpreneurs, startups, anyone really. And don't forget, they've got that free trial.
Exactly. Go to b1thrive.com, give it a shot, let us know what you think.
Yeah.
You might just find that ThriveCloud is that missing piece you've been looking for, even if your office is a beach in Bali. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into political gaslighting and Black trauma.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
Exploring how these forces have impacted the Black community.
Throughout history.
And how they continue to manifest today.
In subtle ways.
In very subtle and insidious ways.
Yeah.
And so now we're going to focus on voting rights.
Okay.
Given the long history of voter suppression targeting Black communities in this country,
Absolutely.
it feels like this is where so many of these threads come together.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The right to vote is fundamental to a democracy.
Right.
But for Black people in this country, it's a right that has been relentlessly under attack.
And it seems like political gaslighting has played a central role in those attacks. Like almost setting up a system where Black people are told their voices don't matter. And then using that lack of participation as evidence to further justify their exclusion.
Precisely. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy designed to maintain power structures and silence dissent.
Okay, so how does that play out?
Well, think about the history of voter suppression tactics used against Black communities.
Okay.
Literacy tests, poll taxes, grandfather clauses.
Right.
Intimidation and violence.
All designed to create barriers.
Exactly. They were blatant attempts to disenfranchise Black voters and undermine their political power.
So while many of these overt tactics have been outlawed, they've sort of evolved.
They've evolved into more subtle forms.
More subtle forms of voter suppression.
That are often harder to recognize and even harder to challenge.
So can you give us some examples of what those look like?
One example is the way voter ID laws are often implemented.
Okay, voter ID laws.
Yeah, on the surface, they might seem like a common sense measure to prevent voter fraud.
Right, sounds reasonable.
But in reality, they disproportionately disenfranchise Black voters, who are statistically less likely to possess the specific types of ID required by these laws.
So you're saying it's like creating a rule that seems neutral.
Right.
But actually has a discriminatory impact.
Exactly.
Because of existing inequalities.
That's exactly what makes these tactics so insidious. They're often framed as being about fairness and security.
Right.
But the reality is they're often strategically implemented in states with a history of voter suppression.
Wow. So it's not really about preventing fraud.
No, it's about making it harder for specific groups of people to vote.
Like a modern-day poll tax.
Exactly. It creates a barrier that might not seem insurmountable to everyone.
Right.
But for those who are already facing systemic disadvantages, it can be the deciding factor.
In whether or not they can vote.
Exactly.
And then there's gerrymandering.
Oh, yeah.
Where voting districts are drawn in a way that dilutes the power of Black voters.
Right. So even when Black people are able to overcome these other obstacles and cast their ballots, their votes might not carry the same weight as those of voters in other districts.
So it's not just about preventing Black people from voting.
No.
It's also about making sure that even when they do vote, their votes don't have the same impact.
That's the goal of gerrymandering, to manipulate the electoral system to favor one party or group over another,
right?
Often at the expense of communities of color.
It's like rigging the game.
Exactly.
So that even if you play by the rules, you're still set up to lose.
You got it.
And then on top of all of that, there's also the reduction of polling places.
Yes, in predominantly Black neighborhoods, making it more inconvenient and time-consuming to vote.
So you have to wait in these really long lines.
Excessively long lines. Yeah, forcing people to choose between exercising their right to vote and meeting their work or family obligations.
Living their lives.
Right.
It's almost like making voting a luxury that only some people can afford.
That's part of the strategy, to create a system where voting feels impossible, to make people feel like their votes don't matter, and then to use their lack of participation as further justification for limiting their access to the polls.
It's a vicious cycle.
It is a vicious cycle.
It's like you're told your voice doesn't matter, and then you're punished for not speaking up.
And that sense of hopelessness, that feeling of powerlessness to change the system is incredibly damaging.
Reinforces the gaslighting.
It reinforces the cycle of political gaslighting.
Wow.
You're told you're not worthy of being heard, so you stop trying to be heard, which in turn is used to justify silencing you further.
This is heavy stuff.
It is.
It can feel so discouraging to realize how deeply entrenched these tactics are. But it's important to remember that we're not powerless.
We are not.
Our voices do matter.
They do.
Our votes do count.
They do.
We cannot let these tactics of manipulation and disenfranchisement win.
We can't.
So what can we do? How do we challenge these voter suppression tactics
and
ensure that our voices are heard?
It starts with education. We need to educate ourselves about the history of voter suppression, the tactics being used today, and the specific laws in our states that are being used to disenfranchise Black voters.
Okay, so knowledge is power.
Knowledge is power. Once we understand how these systems work, we can start to dismantle them.
And then getting involved.
Yes. Volunteer with organizations that are fighting for voting rights, register people to vote, and help people get to the polls, especially those who face the greatest barriers.
So turning our outrage into action.
Exactly.
Channeling our frustration into efforts to create change.
And most importantly, we have to vote.
We have to vote.
Exercise your right to vote in every election, no matter how small. Local elections, school board elections, primaries, general elections, every single one of them matters.
It's about showing up, making our voices heard, and refusing to be silenced.
And remember, political gaslighting thrives on silence, so speak out against injustice. Challenge those who are trying to suppress our votes. Make your voice heard in every way you can.
Thank you for sharing all of this with me.
Of course.
It's been a heavy,
It has.
but incredibly important journey.
I agree.
And we've really gone deep into how political systems create and perpetuate trauma in the Black community.
Yeah.
How gaslighting is used to manipulate and silence those who are experiencing that trauma.
Right.
And how that manipulation extends to efforts to disenfranchise Black voters and undermine their political power.
It's all connected.
But it's not all doom and gloom.
No, it's not.
We've also talked about strategies for resistance,
For healing.
for healing, and for reclaiming our power.
Absolutely.
And I think the most important takeaway from all of this is you're not alone.
You are not alone.
Your experiences matter, your voice matters.
They do.
And together we can create a world where Black trauma is no longer ignored or denied.
A world where Black mental health is a priority.
And a world where Black joy is celebrated and uplifted.
Beautifully said. Keep learning, keep fighting, and keep the conversation going.
Until next time.